Welcome back for a part 2 video on using Excel charting in SharePoint Online. In the first part, we took a look at how you can use an Excel chart, put that together, and show that in SharePoint using the File Viewer web part. If you haven't done those steps yet, be sure to go back and check the preceding video. Today, we're going to look at how to make those charts fully dynamic, meaning they're going to update automatically based on updates happening inside of SharePoint, which is really cool. Once we have this all set up, everything happens automatically and we have fully dynamic charts. Today, we're going to look at two key parts to this that are workflow steps using Power Automate. What we want to do is first make sure we can move data from a SharePoint list to the Excel workbook using a flow. And the other part to this is aggregating data, putting it all together, totaling it up, and having a view set up that will be used by the chart to render the data. So now we're ready to get SharePoint Smart. All right, so we're going to start by taking a look at what we're working with. I just have a example help desk ticket system. I've simplified it a lot, and it's just something I set up with some dummy records just for the purpose of showing what it is we're trying to achieve. Naturally, this charting could apply to anything, but we just needed an example. So just to demonstrate that, what I'm going to do is create a couple of tickets real quick. So we'll say, let's see, my hair is on fire. I hope not. And I'll put in a requester name. I'll just put in my own name. And I need to select a category. We'll pick other. And I need to put in a request date. Let's make that for the 25th. And we said this is status, let's say in progress. I'll add 2 of those. All right, we'll do one more. I've also done some column formatting for this. This is something I'll cover in other videos, but you can see we've got some icons and things going on. And then I'll do one more. I can't find my wallet. That doesn't happen too often, but I'm just putting in some silly stuff here just to have something going. Okay, so putting in my name, and then pick hardware, say in progress, and let's see, we'll say that was from Sunday. I'm just putting in a couple of dummy records. These are sorted automatically by the request date. So this is just to give you an idea of, you may have some kind of system that's got lots of records in it and you want to report on that. Okay, so that's our source data. Here's the thing. We can't really effectively report off of that. There's middle steps that we have to do, and that's really kind of what we're focusing on today. So what we want to do is get to something like this. This is another list I set up, and what we're doing is aggregating the data, which basically means to add it all up. And what we have here are some date ranges, because what we want to make is a trending chart to show, over time what's going on in our help desk system. Okay, so what does that look like? That looks like this. And from our last video, you probably have some idea of how we got this to show up inside of SharePoint. So I have an Excel, and this is the data that we're doing. So I just added a couple in progress tickets. So we didn't update the data just yet, but what we're expecting to see is this chart to update in a few minutes when we get to that part. So what we need to do is have that chart data go from the SharePoint list over to the Excel workbook. Okay, and so that's kind of where we're going to take a look at next. Okay, so let's go to Power Automate. We're going to look at flows. Okay, so there's 2 that we're going to look at. We're going to start with the one that's pretty straightforward, and that's moving the data from here this view, which looks nearly identical to the table I have in the Excel workbook. This part of it, in my opinion, is pretty easy. Okay, so here's just a summary of when that flow is executed. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'll show you exactly what we're doing. So these are blocks that we have. We have a reoccurrence set up. This is going to run at midnight every day. If I hit edit, it'll show me advanced options and things like this. But it's a very simple concept. Every night I want this to go ahead and update for me. That's how our charts are going to be dynamic. And then we just browse to the site and the list. I'll try to zoom in for some of these so you can see more easily. So this is a SharePoint get items action. Okay, nothing complicated here. I just wanted to bring back all those records. Then what we're going to do is loop through the records. So that's what the apply to each for. So what we're looping through is each of these records. So this is a set of 8 records where I'm never going to add or anything like that, because this is an aggregation of data. All I'm ever going to want to do is update these counts in each of these date windows. So basically these are preceding weeks that I want to do counts on. So we're basically just updating the counts that you see in the middle of that view right there. Okay, so for each of those records, we're going to start with the first one, and we're going to get calculations. So you can see we have a date range. So I have, basically 49 to 56 days old. And then I do some calculation. We've got a calculated field in the background that's going to do that for us. Okay, so we're going through and we're just dumping those records to Excel. And that's all there is to it. So for each row, I just wanted to move that over to Excel for me. So there's a special type of action in Power Automate. It's called Update Excel Workbook. Now I've renamed it to make it make more sense to me. So that's what you say. It says Update 8 Week Summary Data Table in Excel Workbook. That's so kind of got some description here, and I understand very easily what's going on when I go back to look at it later. So all I had to do is pick this site. I say that the file's in the document library, and it just wants to know what's the name of the workbook. At that point, all the magic happens. It's going to automatically open that up, pull these fields. Now, it does need to know the name of the table. Okay, so I selected that. If I go to my Excel workbook, you're going to see, if I go to this table and I go to the table design tab, you're going to see I named that 8-week summary. So that's what it's looking for. It needs a name for that. Okay, so it asks me, I need to tell it more than just the workbook, what in the workbook. It's this table, and then it needs a key column. So this is loosely equivalent to the SharePoint ID. So it asks me which column is the key column, and that's how it kind of knows how to match things up. So the key value is this field SDID. Okay, and so I have this field in SharePoint, and also I've got it in my table in Excel. So it's matching those two things up. So it's going to know, which record corresponds to the record in the workbook, and then it just moves it right over for me. And then at that point, all I have to do is go through here, and I just match the columns up. So I want this field I call calc date label to go over to the title, and then the other ones are really obvious. Reported goes to reported, in progress goes to in progress. So this wasn't a coincidence. I set this up to match really well. So when I was planning this out and when I was making this view, by design, I've created this Excel workbook, and then I came back behind and created the SharePoint view just to match up with that. So it's a very kind of one-to-one. It's basically just moving this table you see in the SharePoint list right over to the Excel workbook. Now, as you're working on this, what you do is just kind of do a practice run, maybe do a small part of that just to make sure it's working correctly, and then you can kind of build it up piece by piece. So we can go ahead and run that and update that data. So I'll do that now. Okay, so I'm going to hit the back button, even though this is scheduled, I can run it anytime I want to. So I'm going to do that right now. Just hit run flow. Now this is a very simple little flow. So you can see that normally it takes it around 10, 12 seconds to execute because this isn't a very data intensive operation. I can hit this little refresh button, and now it has pushed the data from SharePoint down to the Excel workbook. It's great. That's exactly what we wanted to happen. Okay, so that's part one. Now we're going to get to part two. We're going to have a little more fun. It's a little more crazy, but this is kind of the next key step. All right, so the next question is, okay, you might say, that's great, well, you've got all this summary, but how in the world did you get it to do all those calculations on those date ranges and things like that? So generally, let's just describe high level what it is we're trying to do in the first place. We want our workflow to look at this whole help ticket list, and we've got some key data. We know the status, and we know the date of the ticket. That's the request date. And that's what we're charting off of. So what we want to do is basically count that all up. We're going to have the flow to do that for us. Okay, so now we're going to get into that second flow. Okay, so this is a flow which looks at the data in one list and calculates that, and then updates another list with our summary data. That's what aggregating the data is doing for us. It's making a summary of all those counts. That's what we're interested in for our charting. Okay, let's edit this and let's look at some of the steps that we do to aggregate the data. Just like the last one, we want to run it nightly. It's just on a recurring schedule. Once we've built this thing and it works, we can just set it loose and it can just run forever and ever, amen. Just go on its own, and that's what's cool about this. Once you've got it all figured out correctly, you don't ever have to touch it. It just happens magically on its own, and you're good to go. Okay, so every night we want it to read through the, it's going to go through the record. So we need a reference. So it's looking at it from the context of the help tickets 8-week list. And from that, for each record, we're basically going to do some querying. Now, this gets into a little bit more advanced concepts. This is a compose action in Power Automate. And so I'm collecting some inputs. You can think of these like variables, just a general concept, just it's holding a value for me. So we have a date for date start and date end for each of these. Okay, so if I look through this list, we've got that stored. So all right, let's go back. So we have range start, range end. That's got a little tangled up there for a second. It's an integer value, and what we're indicating is how many days old. 56 days ago to 49 days ago, 49 days ago to 42. So it's basically like going from last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. That's what those numbers are. We need those numbers because we're going to do a little bit of date math in here. Okay. So we start by collecting those two pieces of information for that record. And then with that in hand, we're just going to make a query. We're using the SharePoint get items action. And basically what we want to do is for each of those categories that we had in there, we want to get a count. And it's going to follow the same pattern every time. So this is the source data, help tickets. And what I want to do is get a count. So this is using something called a filter query. And there's a special language for this, and you can look, and there's an API and reference from Microsoft. What you're saying here is status equals reported in single quotes, and I'm looking at a specific date range. So I want to know when the request date, GE, meaning greater or equal than, and then I have to do a little special formatting here. So there's a special function, format date time, and you have to do a little math to get the calculation for that. But generally speaking, what I'm doing is saying, go ahead and tell me for this record, in this date range, between these 7 days, how many tickets were in that category. And it'll pull back the records. Now normally with get items, you're going to do something with the data. All I care about in this case is how many records were in that filter range. Okay, so on the next step, what I'm doing is putting that in another variable I made with the compose action, which is reported items count. And that's the length of those. So when I go in here, I'll just show you. There's this variable called list of items, and all I'm doing is applying length, and it's a function that tells me how many items are there. Okay, so if I click on that, I have an expression, and it's basically just that with the length in front of it. Okay, so I'm storing that in a variable, and basically I go through each of those different kinds of statuses. So we have I want to know how many reported, and it's exactly the same pattern every time. So once you got one of those down, it's just rinse and repeat. The only difference is this, I'm saying, okay, now tell me the ones that were status in progress. Okay, so it's just going to go through each of those. So it just goes through each of the statuses: reported, in progress, on hold, complete, canceled, and then we have an all items count too. And then once it has collected all those numbers for me, it's going to update the record. Okay, so I have a count for how many reported, how many in progress, how many on hold, complete, canceled, and then all tickets. Okay, so once it gets those totals for me, it's writing back and updating this chart data list I have. This is how we get from this to this. It flattens out my data and gets me those totals. So it's going through each row and it's checking the date range and how many tickets. Okay, so it's just going to iterate through that in a loop. And at this point, we can go ahead and run that. Now, I didn't just magically compose that whole flow all at one time. What you do is you chip away at this in bite-sized pieces, and you know, once you figure out how to get the date format right and get the count right, you know, just one piece at a time, you get it together, and then eventually you get the whole thing doing exactly what you want. All right, so I'm going to run that. Okay, so once again, just to summarize what's going on here, this is actually moving data or getting calculations from the original list and updating this. Now, if you'll remember, we just put in some more in progress tickets, right? And if you watch carefully, you'll notice that some numbers just changed in this view. Now, I actually got it out of order. I got kind of tangled up. So I need to run the workflow to push that down to Excel now. So my SharePoint data is updated. So now I want to go back and run the thing that pushes it to Excel. So I'll just run it again. You know, it only took a few seconds, so we don't have to wait long for that. Okay, it says it's running. Succeeded. Okay, that's what we like. We love the succeeded with the green background. Okay, that's it. So this is automated. Now, it does take a little time. What we're going to see, though, is our numbers change. So we're going to see a chart look different. So we have some changes to in progress. So we have to let that complete. It will chew on that a little bit. You know when it's chewing on it when it shows you that changed view. And then we'll eventually see the in progress change in this chart. So we know from the last video, when we make changes to that Excel workbook and with the file viewer page, it's not instantaneous. It likes to think about it some, and then we see difference. And what you'll notice is the in progress changed, if you notice that chart change. So once you have all that machinery wired up, everything's going to happen for you automatically. So that's everything that we wanted to do. All right, so we'll go ahead and kind of go into summary and wrap up now. Okay, so what we were looking at is how you aggregate data in particular. It's not enough to just use your source data. in some of these cases, we have SharePoint lists that have hundreds or even thousands of records in it. And whenever you're producing a chart, you can't just directly feed that data to the chart. It doesn't make any sense. We don't look at charts with thousands of data points on them. What we're looking at in any kind of chart is summary information. If you think about a pie chart or line chart, generally they're relatively simple concepts. We're looking at a trend over time or something like that. So the data that we have needs to match up and be ready to be consumed to produce that chart. And that's really kind of what we're doing here. And those are really the key concepts. It takes a little practice. I know if you're new to Flow, this is going to be a little bit daunting, but this is a key skill, and this is how you go about it. You want to use those filter queries and get items from SharePoint to get calculations and get you totals or averages or summary information so you can use it on the chart and then use the other part of the workflow to push it down. So that's everything we wanted to show in the second part of how to do Excel charting in SharePoint Online. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those for me. I'll be sure to reply. And I hope that you find this useful, and I hope you're able to tap into this and start setting up some dynamic charting using Excel and SharePoint Online.